don't, whatever you do, call it an emergency budget. That's not what she wants to call it. She wants to call it a spring statement, just an update of the economic growth forecast. And yes, true, it is certainly an update of the forecast, but quite a consequential one, OK? And let me show you why. First of all, we'll start with kind of the big picture. And the big picture always usually starts with this. Economic growth, GDP, and the forecast last time around were for pretty strong economic growth across the economy the next few years. Really important economic growth here. And what we do know is things already look a lot weaker, OK? So we don't know precisely what the official forecasts are going to be in this spring statement, but we do know that look across the consensus and they're talking about this year not being 2%, more like 1%, maybe even weaker. The Bank of England thinks 0.8%, and then potentially weaker going out into the future as well. There's a lot of things going on in the global economy, need I say. On top of that, you also have higher interest rates, OK? And this is just showing you where the Office of Budget Responsibility thought that yield curve, as it's called, interest rates going out the next few decades, where it looked like last time. Well, we know, just looking at the yield curve right now, it's higher. You've got higher interest rates, and that affects us, obviously, with our mortgages, but it also affects the government because it means higher debt interest costs. And why does that matter? Put those things together, and that implies more borrowing. And we already know that's an issue for Rachel Reeves because she's got fiscal rules. She's got two fiscal rules. I'm going to focus in particular on one of them here, which is this one. This is the current budget. And note when I'm saying current budget, so not investment stuff, it's day-to-day spending. That needs, right now it's in a deficit, and if she's going to keep her fiscal rule, that line needs to get from the reddish bit down to the blue bit. It needs to be in surplus by 2029 to 30. And, you know, last time around, when she published her numbers, by the way, when we talk about headroom, by the way, that's what people are talking about. There's no gospel thing, meaning headroom, this is the headroom you have. It is basically about the gap between where you are and where you would end up breaking your fiscal rules. Last time around, this is where that line was going. So it went down to there, and she did have some headroom. But it looks a little bit more like the line is going here now. And you can see the issue. We're still in the red area. We don't get into the blue. But let's just do a little bit of a primer on that point, headroom, because everyone goes on about it, don't they? That's what headroom is, like I say, the gap between that and that. And it's been up and down quite a lot recently. We'll take that bar and put it over there. It's been up and down quite a bit recently. Under Jeremy Hunt, it was kind of around just over 10 billion, 13.6 billion pounds. Then the economy improved, because you can see there's lots going on. The economy can improve. It's not just about decisions the Chancellor makes, and it can really change that. So the economy improved a little bit compared with what was expected, and that pushed it up to 23 billion pounds. But at that point in October, Rachel Reeves said, look, I want to take that money, and rather than pocketing it, I want to spend it, mostly on NHS and other things. Remember, this is not investment we're talking about, it's current spending. And that took it down to £9.9 billion. And at the time, a lot of us were saying, that's not that much. You know, it's not that safe against your fiscal rules to leave only £9.9 billion. What's going to happen in the future? Well, now we're about to find out. Compared with the past, by the way, that £9.9 billion, it is, like I was saying, historically, chancellors have left more room against their fiscal rules than Rachel Reeves did last time around. But, you know, there have been others which have been kind of similarly tightish. But it was a risk. It was always a risk, and it's a risk that hasn't necessarily paid off, because if we take that and put that back there and factor in the stuff that we know has happened, weaker growth, higher interest rates, the best bet is that's down to maybe minus 5 billion. In other words, or to put it another way, that they are still in a deficit rather than a surplus. Headroom is gone. That's the key thing. To the extent that we care about headroom, and the Chancellor really does care about headroom, because she's got these fiscal rules. And in this case, she's basically got three options. So she's essentially broken her fiscal rules, or would break her fiscal rules, if she wanted to keep them. So she could chuck out her fiscal rules, but she said they're ironclad. Option two, raise taxes. Well, she said she doesn't want to raise taxes. She said the big tax rise has already come. And actually, when you look at the level of taxation in the UK, the higher this line is, the higher the level of taxation, the tax burden it's sometimes called, that is already heading up to the highest level since the 1940s. So we've already got really high taxes in this country. So she doesn't want to do something on that, at least for the time being. How long that can hold out, we don't really know. But that leaves only one other thing, spending. And are there going to be spending cuts in the future? This is what the government currently has planned for spending. Again, it's just day-to-day spending in departments at the moment. There's a big amount of spending that's going out this year. That's that NHS stuff. That's that giveaway. But the next few years was always quite weak. And this thing is, you can't really change that because that's kind of factored in already. But the best bet is she's going to reduce these bars. Now, 1%, the blue bits, that's what Jeremy Hunt had planned, 1%. She's got 1.4, 1.3%. Does she bring her bars, her spending increases, down to about 1.1%? So she's not going to take it down to the Jeremy Hunt levels, one would guess. But if she took it down to £1.1 billion, that would save about £5 billion. Doesn't look that good, though, does it, if politically, I think, for the Labour Party. However, there's another way, take the same data, there's another way of showing the data, which I imagine is the way that they would prefer to show it, which looks slightly different, OK? So say exactly the same numbers here. That's the Jeremy Hunt trajectory. This is what Rachel Reeves' trajectory looked like back in October. The big difference between them is that first year, that big red bar I showed you a moment ago in the kind of fiscal year we're about to go into. But this is what that line would look like with a 1.1% increase. So not a massive difference. And, if they talk about spending, I imagine it's that line they'll want to talk about. But the key thing is, there are certain departments, unprotected departments, for whom that might feel a bit like austerity. Even so, £5 billion, you get £5 billion back from that, so you can wipe out that and you're back to zero. But you need to do more than that, don't you? And what are they going to do? Well, we already know about the welfare cuts. So this is where they come in. The welfare cuts could bring in about £5 billion. So that takes you up to about £5 billion. The welfare cuts. Where do you get the remaining £5 billion? Because I imagine she'd want to get back to about £10 billion. Well, this is the interesting thing, OK? If you take a lot of spending that was going into day-to-day spending in development and stick it into a department where you're mostly spending it on investment, defence, then actually, because that rule that I showed you a moment ago is all about day-to-day spending, suddenly, miraculously, down to an accounting tweak, really, it looks like you're back up to £10 billion, which you kind of are. Now, a lot of people will call this jiggery-pokery, which of course it is. A lot of people will ask, why do we fixate so much about headroom and fiscal rules? But the Chancellor does and the Prime Minister does, and that's basically the world we're in right now. So for the time being, that's what we can have to expect in the spring statement, but raising the question, will there be more of this drama yet to come?